and welcome back to the Digital Autonomy in the Computing Continuum high-level workshop. We had a very dense morning with a lot of interesting presentation and discussions. I hope we still have all of you on board, because now we start with a plenary session that will be of high relevance to all of us, also to define and shape the Cloud-Edge-IoT work program for 2023-2024. So now it's my pleasure to leave the floor to Max Lemke, that will provide an introduction, in particular setting the scene for Horizon Europe Work Program 2023, that will be followed by a presentation from Pierre Chastanet. I repeat, Max Lemke is the head of Internet of Things unit at the European Commission DigiConnect, and Pierre Chastanet is the head of Cloud and Software unit, always at DigiConnect. So Max, I give you the floor.
Okay, so then let me introduce the afternoon session. And for the afternoon session, I would just like to reiterate, you were here a long time, so I don't want to speak very long about the introduction. My colleagues Piers O'Donoghue and Pierre Chastanet have given you an idea of the EU data strategy and what is happening there. The Horizon Europe program is part of the implementation of that strategy, and we particularly look at cloud, at research and innovation in the area of Cloud-Edge-IoT. We have discussed this morning what is happening already in 2021 and 22. So that's the light blue stuff on top of this presentation. So we had a morning session on destination 4 on the topic open source for cloud-based services, parallel with one, and followed by one on cognitive cloud. And then we had a parallel session to that on decentralized intelligence at the edge. So, and the other topic that we had on Meta OS is already closed, because we are already evaluating if the deadline has passed. So now we are going to the next step, and that's the subject of the discussions of this afternoon, where we are trying to get all major alliances, associations to tell us their view. And our big question that we are asking this afternoon is, how should we support Cloud-Edge-IoT in Horizon Europe? So how should we complement what is done on deployment in Digital Europe now? What should we do in Horizon Europe to prepare the next generation of technologies for our Cloud-Edge-IoT infrastructure in Europe to come? So we are forward looking. So we basically have 3 areas that we identified from your input. So the blue boxes come out of the Cloud Edge industrial technology, out of the roadmap that the CEOs have prepared, and that was published in May this year. I've said that this morning. And we also had the strategy forum on Cloud Edge IoT in beginning of this year on Cloud-Edge-IoT, and in particular on issues like operating systems or orchestration systems for the IoT, decentralized intelligence, and such topics. So that's the input. Now, we have looked at what has been proposed by these high-level people, and also what is in the strategic research agendas of the different associations and alliances, and we have bundled that in kind of 3 topics. One topic is the open source for cloud and edge digital autonomy. So that's basically saying that if we, Europe, develop a microprocessor, or if there is an open source microprocessor developed across the world, how could we get an open source cloud stack to support server, cloud, and edge servers in Europe? And there we look at open architectures for cloud edge processing, at complementing on the software level what is done on the semiconductor level, and enable EU hardware for use in a cloud edge data center. so we stimulate this through open source because we know we have a very limited amount of money available. So our stimulation is really going towards the open source community here to work together on that. That's one strand. The other strand we have is on the right-hand side. We see that when we go towards the compute continuum from the edge devices and the far edge devices in the IoT to the cloud, there's a lot of management necessary because even the devices where the computation and data collection takes place are not owned by the same people. They are different devices operated in different ways and come together in this cloud continuum. So this cannot be managed by hand. I mean, we cannot say when we hand data from from a device at the edge of in the leaves of the IoT to the cloud, we cannot do that by hand. So we need intelligence, we need automation on that. So we call this topic intelligence and automation for efficient data processing in the computing continuum. So that is really the whole processing chain in the computing continuum. And what are the most important topics that we extract from your documents? We see the management of the computing continuum in general that links to the buzzword of interoperability coming out of the CEO group recommendations. We need the end-to-end security for data processing that links to the hook on cybersecurity in the first priority of the CEO group. We need identity management across the continuum that links to a large extent to the comment on trustworthiness in the compute continuum here. And we need the green optimization of data processing across the continuum. That basically means we optimize, for example, where you do things. Do you process data in the IoT device or do you send it to the cloud? So there's a trade-off between the costs and the carbon footprint of sending the data or processing it directly, and same on the energy side. And all these 4 points link directly to the first priority that the CEO group on Cloud-Edge brought forward, namely becoming the leader in domains that will shape European cloud and edge offerings on the global market, focusing on. And they have put 4 points here, and these 4 points were elaborated much deeper in the text of the recommendations. And we have picked these topics up as the points where we need more intelligence and automation, and brought it up to the level of a topic under Horizon Europe Work Program 23-24 in Cluster 4. And that complements what is done in key digital technologies, the joint undertaking, what is done in the joint undertaking on smart networks and services, but also what is done in other areas like IoT or data. Okay, so that gives you more or less the picture, and we would like to know from you as a major question. We have put some more strategic questions, but one of the key question we are asking for is, what do you suggest with limited resources or limited funding we have available, what we should focus on the research side? Now, next step is also the innovation side, or what we call innovation actions. When you see what we are developing right now under the first work program, 23-24, we get a lot of technologies already. When I look at the outcome of the current call, which you don't know, but I get a wide spectrum of technologies that I would expect to be ready for preparation for deployment in 23-24. Or starting 23-24. So we have put one action here, which we call piloting emerging smart IoT platforms and decentralized intelligence. I would say piloting could include test bedding and things like that. So I would see that at the moment as a broad term that we can refine, and we would also be happy if you help us refine that. So that would be going on higher technology readiness level towards rolling out these technologies and supporting that rollout in a sense of thinking, well, let's prepare the deployment in the next generation of Cloud-Edge-IoT infrastructures in Europe. So we look at maturing and customizing that in and across sectors, validate reference architectures and open platforms in an application context. So in application context, for me, means that could as well be vertical projects in vertical sectors that collaborate with each other so that we consolidate on a horizontal level. We would like to foster the innovation scenarios in the compute continuum. We would like to see definitely, and that's a must, consensus and ecosystem building in and across verticals. I'll pick up Marc Duranton's point of this morning, where he basically said, we are so scattered. We have all the competences, but our competences are very scattered. So we need to bring them together in consensus building, in ecosystem building. And that is, again, something we need to do in the verticals and across verticals in order to be able to bridge between what comes out of the research topics of this work program in the next program towards adoption in reality. So, and that the way to do this is piloting in and across verticals. So a bit that's our plan that we have. And we would like to have your ideas first, and then maybe at the end of your speeches, at least at the end of the speeches, you could give the speakers could give a short appreciation or non-appreciation of what we have put here on this slide. So this would be my introduction to this session. I cut it a bit short and didn't want to discuss again what was discussed at length this morning. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Max. I remind the people that the slides will be made available after this event. And I invite now on stage Pierre Chastanet to go on with this slot, his presentation. And I invite all people to actually drop, in case they have questions, on the chat. Pierre, the floor is yours. I don't see Pierre.
No, but you see Manuel.
Manuel, yeah, sorry, Manuel. In fact, this morning, Pierre said that you might be the one in charge. Sorry, apologies. Manuel Mateo is the deputy head of unit for the cloud and software unit at DigiConnect. Manuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Monique. Thank you very much. So I'm the short version of the title is that I'm Pierre's deputy, and so I'll try to faithfully replace him this afternoon. Will you be playing the slides?
We don't have these slides.
We don't have them.
Okay, let me try to put them on screen.
Yes, Verena, you should have them. Pierre,
the ones for the afternoon. Okay.
Exactly, afternoon.
Give me a moment. Sorry
Yes.
for that.
But so I can start without the slides, actually. I think Max did an excellent job at introducing the afternoon, and the core and the focus should really be this last slide and the questions he has put. And I think what we want to get out of this afternoon is really the answers to those questions. But for you to understand well the whole framework and the whole frame of the whole landscape, if you want, within which you need to answer, there's two things that I want to present to you this afternoon, for which I've got 4 slides. Let me first move to the intro slide. This is a yes, that was correct. This is the bigger landscape of the of our strategy. So it's the EU data strategy. This is a fairly stable slide on which is not changing every day, if you want. It's the data strategy of February 2020, out of which we have a number of regulatory actions, a number of legislative actions, a number of policy actions, and quite a bit of funding. What I'm going to focus this afternoon is the yellow circle on the left, the green circle on the left, the IPCEI, and the Cloud Alliance, which I think the name, which is the icon just below. So that left part, I'm sure Hubert Tardieu later on will detail a little bit more other aspects such as Gaia X here. So the first thing I want to go through is the next slide, please. Is the IPCEI on cloud infrastructure and services. If you're in a hurry, IPCEI can be pronounced IPSI. If, like me, you're not a big fan of acronyms, the full name is the Important Project of Common European Interest. I think what is important to understand is the tool in itself, the instrument, how it works. It's an instrument whereby a number of member states decide to join forces. In this case, there's 12 of them, and you see them at the very bottom of the slide. This was an initiative initially launched by Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, and you see that 8 further member states have joined, and an attempt to create such an important project. It consists in them in being able to demonstrate that there's a market failure on a given area, and in this case, it's on a cloud infrastructure and services, and propose to the Commission to invest in that sector. And to do that, they need clearance of the Commission, so that it's compatible with the state aid laws. So the member states, and so it's a little bit of a joint work with them where the initiative is theirs, but we accompany them throughout the exercise. As part of this exercise, what they've been doing is a call for interest from their respective industries, from their national industries. The calls are now over, and they've gathered projects from about 200 companies. But those are, if you want, national projects, because they've been called by different member states. So this exercise is done and gone, if you want. And what member states, again, with our help, are now doing is to find synergies in between those projects to come up with, if you want to call them mega projects, or it's a bit about merging them where there is overlap and synergies in between them. Ultimately, the member states are going to propose this IPSI to the Commission, which will assess and hopefully eventually approve it. You have there on screen the different elements of the exact scope and the exact aim and the resources. Next slide, please. And those are the 5 objectives of the IPCEI on cloud and infrastructure, cloud to edge infrastructures. So I'm not going to get into the details of each of them, but I think it's very important that you understand, since we're talking today about the next work program of Horizon, that the projects that will ultimately result from the IPSI will be as well of an innovative nature, might not be as much research as Horizon Europe, but will be there. All in all, the amounts involved in the important project will be quite significant. Again, it's not European money, but it's national funding that is approved by the Commission. And I think it's worth understanding as well that quite a few of those member states have decided to spend their part of their recovery and resilience facility funds into this project. So the core really is the development and initial rollout of next generation of cloud and edge federated capabilities. This is the full title, and you see there a few of the main names and the main concepts on which they're going to work. So I think it's extremely important at the moment of formulating Horizon Europe work program that those comes not as that they don't present an overlap with what is being developed in the IPCI, but more as a complement and work in synergies with, I would guess, a slightly longer time frame, because the projects on the IPCI are going to start already next year. Might be arguably, so then you need to look into the details a little bit closer to market. While again, the Horizon Europe here, we're talking about the work program 23-24. So with projects that might only actually start well in 24-25 and then only start bearing fruits a little bit later. So that might not be the exact same timeline. This is it for the important project of common European interest on cloud and edge capabilities. I'll move now to the other thing I want to present to you this afternoon. Next slide, which is the Alliance. So it's the Cloud-Edge Alliance. To the difference of the IPC, so it's two different animals. They you know, both are about cloud to edge, but they don't have the same the commonalities, if you want. Stop here. The Alliance is, you can call it a stakeholder platform. It's probably the easiest way of calling it. It's an initiative from the Commission, which was part of the data strategy I mentioned a bit earlier. It is the platform, the discussion platform through which we hope to see to materialize together with member states and industry. So both sides, if you want, public and private, will be around the table, through which we want to materialize the digital targets of 2030, and the two of concern out of the 10 are to deploy 10,000 climate neutral, highly secure edge nodes across Europe, and raise significantly to 75% the usage of cloud solutions by European businesses. So you have there in blue, green, and orange the three elements, the three, if you want, pillars of action of the Alliance. There's an open call to be a member of the Alliance. The links are provided in the very last slide, so you will have everything with today's presentations. Next slide, please. So it is, I think, again, I'm not going to go into the tiny details, but do know that it's open to pretty much anyone. It has an open nature, businesses, research organizations, which I guess are very much represented here, civil society as well, but as I mentioned as well, to all member states and public authorities in the broad sense. There's a number of eligibility criteria which are detailed in the links that are provided, which need to be carefully, which I invite you to carefully look at. And of course, we will assess the participation one by one. We want this alliance to be very much driven by the voices of the people around the table. There will be subgroups where there are specific objectives and elements to be looked at. We look forward to have a launching event still this year. And this will be our main vehicle to cooperate with other organizations, of course, Gaia-X that I already mentioned, but with quite a few of other alliances, groups, data spaces, and different associations in this area. The last slide that you can show, please, is the different links. So the Horizon Europe, of course, that you know, but then the IPCEI website and the Alliance different elements with a point of contact for you to reach. My presentation wouldn't be complete without mentioning that yesterday we launched the Digital Europe program. So the work program, the first work programs in plural of Digital Europe have been published yesterday, with the calls of hopefully being open next week. I invite you as well in this context of raising your voice about your wishes for the next round of Horizon Europe, to look carefully at what we're doing here, and in particular in the so-called main work program, in the specific objective 2. I think the whole of the specific objective 2 is very relevant, and in particular the first topic, which is about cloud, and the second topic, which is about data spaces. I think a lot of those words have come up, and of course Digital Europe is even much closer to the market, but I think it's highly relevant to understand the background and understand the bigger picture of all our actions. So this is it in my tentative to explain you many things in 15 minutes, but I'm staying around for possible questions now or later. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Indeed, squeezing a lot of very relevant information. But as I mentioned before, we will have the slides available. And now we start with the rest of the session, and I give the floor here to, sorry, I have a blank. Who is the moderator?
I will take it up. Thanks, Rolf speaking.
Okay.
Thanks, Monique.
Rolf?
Welcome to the afternoon session. I think the session will be moderated by myself, and I also invite my colleague Maika Vorenbach from E2. So we're doing that jointly in partnership with 2 units, because the main topic is not only what are the new challenges for the new X work program, but also how to work best in partnership. Maika, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Rolf, for the introduction.
Okay, thank you. So we have basically divided the session in 2 parts, basically 2 panels. The first panel driven by industrial initiatives, and the second one more by partnership initiatives. And I don't want to lose more time. Each panelist is given a pretty short time for short introduction, short statements, before we run into a panel discussion on different questions. So it's an honor to invite the distinguished speakers from different associations. So first, Leo Isaac Dongras, then Kai Brzezinski, Hubert Dieu, and Joseph Urban. So we may start with inviting the first speaker to give a short statement. So Leo is director at Capgemini. He is responsible for digital trust and security with Capgemini's Invent Global Public Sector Unit. And he also is co-author of a book, Cyber, la guerre permanente, which gives the notion of humane interest. He's also lecturing at Sciences Po Paris. And thank you for being here, and I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Rolf. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon to everyone who's following the session online. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you can hear me well. So yeah, it's a pleasure to share a first perspective. To get right into it, actually, what I'll share is actually not just a Capgemini opinion. It's let's say a synthesis of work that we conducted together with 30 other industries, European industries, earlier this year. You'll see them appear up on the screen very soon, normally. And what I want to share is that we're actually already happy to see that it's been referenced in some of the first introductions. We're happy to see that some of the priorities that came out of this work conducted and published in a report in May seems to have started to found its place in some of the technology priorities. As a quick recap, so earlier this year, these 3 representatives, coming from across industry, equipment manufacturers, infrastructure providers, telco operators. You also see service providers, but also end users is really key. So we got together to try to think of what is missing to achieve European digital competitiveness leadership in this data economy space. And so to share some of these insights, I wanted to start with one overarching principles. First, the first thing that really came out, and that we think should drive the prioritization of investments to start answering some of Max's earlier questions, is to really think of the fact that all segments of the Cloud-Edge continuum can't be addressed in the same way because they have different levels of maturity. That's clear. And so if we start with, what are the needs, what are the, let's say, medium to longer term needs, if you really look to the R&I programs coming up. If we start with traditional centralized cloud capabilities, in that space, you've got technology that's more mature. And so that means the priority for Europe, in our view, should be around differentiation. That really comes out, in the kind of key elements that were pushed by CEOs of our different companies coming out of this report. Then the question becomes, how do you achieve that differentiation in cloud? So to give a few perspectives here, and I'll do this. You don't expect a slides because I wanted to make sure I could adapt to the conversation. So I'll pick out first, very briefly, because open source was already discussed this morning. Clearly, we should aim for more open source when it comes to traditional cloud, because that's what's going to enable differentiation. That's also what industry users now expect, given the relative maturity of technology, particularly at infrastructure or IaaS level. And so the added value and focus of innovation will come from greater standardization, greater open source, and greater common frameworks across Europe. And that's very much where we hope some of the work by the IPCEI is going to land onto very, let's say, tangible outcomes, common components that can be leveraged by the European industry and even more widely. A second key area for differentiation that came out in the report, and this I think is really something that we need to talk a bit more about, even though I know it's in everyone's mind, is how to get all these capabilities towards a more sustainable and specifically more carbon neutral setting, environment, and capabilities. And so here we believe there's definitely a significant share of public-private joint investment that needs to go into the research and development of that type of technology, both at hardware and software level, to meet the EU's climate neutrality targets, but also to strengthen the competitiveness of the European industry abroad. It's as Max said earlier, there are domains where European industry can really achieve a global leadership position. Sustainability, carbon neutral computing is very much one of them. And so if I take one example here of a disruptive technology that has quite high potential, for example, that we outline in the report, and a technology that also has high certainty, and so is, let's say, quite well positioned for some of these R&I programs, it's DNA storage. And if you look to 2025, 2030, DNA storage could very much become one of the most carbon efficient mediums of storing and managing petabytes of data, and that's why we outline it, amongst the more innovative, groundbreaking solutions that we push for data infrastructure management and technology. Another innovation, to start bringing these into discussion, that could very much help bring us closer to carbon neutrality is around developing collaborative platforms that enable industries across all sectors to holistically monitor and optimize the carbon impact of their data infrastructure and services. And so such what we call it in the report decarbonization data platforms. They would incorporate the, let's say, eco-efficiency metrics, automated collection of data, simulation analytics, and algorithms that are required to decarbonize. But these, for example, haven't naturally emerged from the market at wide scale today. And that's because, one, they require quite a lot of cross-company, cross-industry analysis. So you need to be able to have programs that bring these kind of players together with a sort of common interest. And also they've required, still quite a bit of R&D, still very much innovation required there. Again, that's why we push them out in the report. I'll move to a third component. So I mentioned open source, I mentioned sustainability. The third area that we very much outline as a domain in which there needs to be a European leadership is around cybersecurity and data access management controls. That's a very wide term, and I think a lot of that is already ripe for implementation. So if I focus on the part that's more about what is needed for R&I, I guess the key element here is to think that future is going to be multi-cloud, multi-edge. And so it's really key to be able to develop the next generation kind of cloud security solutions that ensure that you can deploy a consistent security policy across these heterogeneous multi-cloud, multi-edge, hybrid cloud and edge environments. And so, for example, solutions that give the ability to maintain data in a continuous encrypted state while working on them. So you've got homomorphic encryption, as very much a domain that will require attention. And we also underline the importance of investment in quantum-proof encryption technologies that are applicable to these cloud edge environments. Quantum is a domain of itself, but we think there's very much an application to bring them into securing the cloud edge continuum. And finally, the third element in terms of cybersecurity is, we recommend a focus on developing encryption technologies that can operate in the kind of harsh industrial environmental conditions that you have when you want to deploy this computing continuum all the way to the industry and leverage data at the edge. And so you need to have encryption technology that manages high vibration, high temperature, high pressure environments. So I hope that's already a first good overview. I think we'll have time for quite a bit of discussion around this. One last thing I want to say before closing is just that here very much focused on, let's say, supply side incentives, supply side dynamics that we want to push. But it's really important, even for the R&I initiatives, from our perspectives, from the perspectives of the firms that collaborate in this report, to keep the users in mind and make sure that these users are brought in even to the R&I process. And so we're very much looking forward, whether it's within the Industrial Alliance, within the IPCEI, and within the work programs to be announced in 2023, to make sure that that element is really incorporated, and that the technology, the R&D is built with the users in mind, and really moves to testing and first industrial deployment as fast as possible. I'll close there, and unless I have any more speaking time.
Thanks so much, Leo. I think
you.
that was the introduction to the industrial strategy and the roadmap from the Alliance. I think we move on to a different side of the medal, more hardware system driven, and I kindly invite Kay Biushinsky from Infineon Technology, who's also a member of EPOS. So since 2018, he works as a technical project lead in Infineon and responsible for technical management of projects in the area of machine learning and others. So he is involved in many of the R&I projects, also including KDT projects. And he's also author of a recent white paper of AI at the edge. So that is the main discussion today. And Kai, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Also welcome from my side. Today I want to talk a little bit about the white paper we did in the expert group of EPOS and talk a little bit about the content and the conclusion we generated. But first, I want to talk about the mindset perspective we had. And that is when you look at the different indicators which represent technology development, then you see many of these indicators form exponential graphs. One of the most famous example, Moore's law, but also other technologies like, for example, cryptocurrencies have, when you look at the wallet users, exponential graphs. And when you look, and besides these two examples, we have many more examples where we can see we live in an exponential age. And naturally, this is a difficult time, but also exciting time, because the human thought or humans think more linear, and especially this also we see in our institutions, they are more linear. But the technologies develop exponential. That means it's only getting faster and faster from here, and hence the work of expert group becomes even more important to keep track of the technologies, the developments. And our group is looking especially on the edge. From our perspective, when you look at the whole network structure, you have at the top in the cloud, then at the middle layer the fog, and down in the edge. And now coming to the content of the white paper itself, we looked at quite a diversity of use cases, and but even then, there are so many use cases where you can use edge AI that we couldn't include all of them in the white paper because that would more go in the direction of a book. Just to give here for some examples, which robot are co-working, or automated inlet ships where we move some of the logistics from the streets on the water channels in especially big cities, or other examples in effective computing or smart street lights. And seeing all these different diversity, as already mentioned in previous sessions, requires so that everything can work together in the future, a higher focus on interoperability. And coming from the use cases, we also looked then in the state of the art, and as you would have expected, there's already some hardware out there, but mostly from American companies, also not European companies. We have also for Edge AI already quite amount of specialized algorithms, but also distributed learning approaches, which are very important for Edge AI because of the limited resources at the edge. And besides this, we have also some first frameworks, platforms, and also the focus on the question, how can the edge and the cloud work together? Here in this picture, you see one of these examples. They have more smaller tasks which are more time critical and at the edge, and then the more not so time critical tasks can be moved to the cloud. And also very important in the topic of hardware software code design. But when we looked at all of the states of the arts, it's more a beginning. There are no real mature products yet. There are no mature algorithms yet or mature systems. We are at the beginning phase, and this naturally provides a high amount of potential. And there are still many things to solve, many challenges to look at, and trust, explainability, learning and relearning at the edge, very important. But one topic that perhaps is sometimes forgotten is the question of functional safety security of AI. And here I have an example for a tech on image processing AI, where you see here a banana, and then there's a specific pattern you can print out and put besides the banana, and then algorithm no longer recognizes this banana as a banana, but as a banana as a toaster. And you can imagine this is especially a problem for self-driving cars, which rely on image processing, where you put in some kind of these stickers on shields, like a stop shield, and then the stop shield is no longer recognized as stop, but perhaps as 100 km/h or something like this. So it's something to look out and something to look at. Then coming from the state of the art, there still needs to, it's the state as the hardware, the algorithm itself needs to be further developed to really be usable for a wider broad audience. And this also here, we have example of integrating AI into the smallest devices. What we mean is that it's not just we have AI, for example, running on a router, but we have running in the AI on sensor nodes near the sensor itself. And then we have many more topics, which many were already described in other sessions, for example, like neuromorphic technologies. But we not only looked in the paper at technology topics, but also at the European landscape. And there are already some projects there, but it could be more, and especially so that it could be more in the direction so that we not lose the race against other parts of the world. And to win these races, we have formulated a list of actions, and some of these I have you can see here. More you can find in the paper. I want to point out here one important one, and this is the strengthening the cooperation between hardware and software communities. Because for Edge AI, what we see is that the borders between hardware and software are getting more and more fuzzy. A good example for this are the neuromorphic technologies itself, where you want to put algorithms into hardware, but in the algorithms development itself, also, it happens in software. So it's getting more important that these two communities work together, which is not really normal, sadly, today. And then also a look of the future of what you can perhaps expect in the next version of the white papers is we want to look at Edge AI in the context of the metaverse, especially from Facebook, because to transmit the human movement, face expression in real time, you need AI at the edge, especially in virtual reality headset and augmented reality headset. And one other topic we want to point out is Edge AI in space. When you look at that the space race and developments is that we're moving away from government push into space to more private companies pushing space. Best example, SpaceX itself. And when you're talking to quote by quote experts in this area, they imagine that we see latest in the next decade manufacturing in space, laboratories in space, data centers in space, and perhaps also already then a base on the moon, which we can use to investigate, explore the rest of the universe. And naturally, Edge AI is very important here to process, on the one hand, the satellite data to pre-process it, but also then for example, to send it to the data center where it's fused together, or also to make sure that the stations in the space are working properly. And that would be then all from my side.
Thank you so much. So we have seen a different perspective, also complementing some talks in the morning, as your main message, strengthening hardware and software communities and coping with the exponential scale of different technologies and technology evolution, I think is one of the major challenges, certainly. Having said this, I move on to our third panelist. I kindly invite Hubert Tadieu. Hubert is an independent board member of Gaia-X. He has been in 2020 the interim CEO, and then in 2021 the chairman of the board of Gaia-X ASBL, the association. And he is until which the role he assumed until June, and now he is independent board member in charge of the relationship with governments. Before that endeavor, Hubert was well known as an advisor of Atos at the CEO level, helping to form a global vision around the world with a remarkable achievement putting in place an Iot scientific community, which comprises quite a significant number of top scientists. He also is an author of several books, and the latest published in 2020 called Deliberately Digital, Rewriting Enterprise DNA for Enduring Success. And we're looking forward for your intervention there.
Thank you, Rolf. A very nice introduction. So let me, in 10 minutes, try to give you the Gaia-X perspective. So we have heard what is intended in AppCI. We have heard what is intended on the hardware side. What is it about Gaia-X? And before starting that, I would like to give you the context. And for that, I will use one of the projects which has been considered in the mobility data space, which is in fact a project driven by Renault, PSA, Nokia, Vinci, and the Department of Essonne to facilitate transportation from home, as you can see on this slide, onto the place of work by using transport lane, which will be on a given road. And this has been worked upon by an institute called VDECOM in a project called Trapeze. So let me quickly say, we do have right now a situation with a pretty low throughput. There will be a first step where you will have regulated lanes, a second step where you will have automated longitudinal control, but the real step what we want to achieve, that they want to achieve, will be to have shuttle which are running at high speed, 120 kilometers, separated by only a few meters, which are running in a lane which is specific to them. Interestingly enough, if we achieve step 2, it will be the same throughput than a subway. Now, I would like to take 2 minutes to tell you why I have taken that example, because we do have right now many of the interesting topics in this automotive case, which is one of the cases which has been chosen in the Alliance. And I would like to say that what is important is to understand what will be done within the vehicle and what will be done within the infrastructure. And I would like simply to say that we see two types of models. One model, which is more a model which will be popular in the US, where autonomous vehicle is done by most of the intelligence which is positioned within the vehicle, while we believe this kind of scheme, the one of Trapeze, is showing a very different story, where most of the intelligence is in the infrastructure, in some kind of local cells on the road, and vehicle is only doing actuation. So I was starting with that just to give you the context. Let me now tell you a little bit of the discussion which have taken place at the occasion of the IPCEI. And I would like to say that I have been checking those hypotheses with the people who are in charge of Catenaics, the significant alliance between automotive manufacturers, which is already bringing together the three major German automotive manufacturers, all part van manufacturer as well, and which has been recently joined by Stellantis, but also by Ford in Detroit. What I would like to give you is the context in which we are working in Gaia-X. This context is based upon what we learn from the various data spaces we are creating, and Catenaics is the most advanced one, to be followed by health data space, to be followed as well by energy data space. First, IT architecture for automotive cannot be delivered by a single provider. So automotive will be edge devices, but the car operating system must be able to interoperate with mobile and fixed edge for mobility, and as well as manufacturing. Second, operational IT and OT have to work in a continuum, which is exactly what Max has explained this morning in terms of connectivity, security, predictability. Now, What is important to understand is that the game will be played differently depending on the countries. We do have specificity in Europe. We do have the situation, for instance, for car of a dense environment where it's better to put the intelligence in the infrastructure because we can share it between many users. Different story in the US as well. And I would like to insist on that one, which was really given to me by the people of Catenaix. The Cloud-Edge Continuum must provide a runtime to allow services and data to be processed across various providers. So no one provider can do it all on itself, and it has to accommodate various providers, various connectivity types, various network zones. And it has to cover end-to-end security, authorization, authentication, control over bandwidth, latency, redundancy, plus an integrated DevOps environment, which is enabling deploying and operating different provider and type of nodes. Okay, that is really what I would like to tell you is what we have understood from the demands, at least for the automotive. Now, what is it we are doing in Gaia-X at this time? We are providing, and all the three things I will mention to you will be ready for prototyping at the end of the year. That will be announced at the summit next week. So provide one framework embedding European value, allowing users to take educated decisions based on reference architecture for ecosystem and compliance to ensure transparency and measure interoperability. We wish to have one decentralized ecosystem which is ferreting interoperable ecosystem. And I give you there the basically 4 topics on which we are especially active at this point: automotive, mobility, and energy, especially for charging station. What we believe is that we will have services which will be going from one place to the other. The second element is the capability to have one framework embedding European value to take educated decision, findable, accessible, interoperable. And I would like as well to say that within Gaia-X, we are developing both the rules for compliance and the label. The compliance are more devoted to service provider. The label are more the way the various users are developing their request. Now, this is the most important slide of what I am showing to you. We believe that edge computing will be about, because of interoperability, because no one can do it by itself, of service chaining and service composition. So Gaia-X want to enable the composition of services stack across multiple service providers. This enables participants to chain services together and create distributed processing pipeline. Composition of service chaining, distributed process require interoperability assessment, automation to scale deployment. Service can be data, data stream, infrastructure as a code, managed, self-managed single tenant. So most of the things that you, Max, have explained this morning in your box, which was hard blue in the right of your screen. And there are several levels of interoperability: technical, legal, and financial. Now, the real important things I would like to inject for what you ask us, Max, which is to give you ideas for 23-24. Edge cloud architecture is a specialization of service composition, distributed service pipeline, as described before, with additional constraints on latency, bandwidth, location, network roaming, all the things you have said. Now, what is important to be said is that Gaia-X is obviously following closely IPCE work. Most of the participants to IPSI are members of Gaia-X, but we believe Gaia-X can bring something very specific, which is to have mature ecosystem like Catenaix, like energy, like Industry 4.0, like mobility, which will be ready to test the outcome of what will be developed within Horizon Europe. synchronization of the time frame between Gaia-X and IPCEI and Horizon Europe is extremely important. Now, the two other important things, legal challenge are critical for success. So typically contracts, data usage control, label certification. And our motto is very clear, and I think it was included in Max's slide this morning. Autonomy seen as composition of service requires that we can eliminate financial and contractual intermediary through automation. In other words, Continuum will only work if automation of control and e-governance will become the norm. This is, in our view, the prerequisite for scale-up. If we depend upon Court of Justice to check conformance, it will never work. So we are thinking about that right now in Gaia-X, in our label strategy, but we would be interested in the discussion to come after this presentation to come back onto these topics. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the very inspiring talk. Talk about the cooperative autonomy and in the continuum. We've seen that operation of IT and OT and the operation of a connected automated vehicle requires a continuum. I think at least that is the European approach, the European way to go. And you're strongly advocating that can be done by a single provider, but to have a decentralized and open ecosystem. I think that we have to address also later on, and also know how to synchronize the time frame between different initiatives. I think that was also a question in the chat. We'll address that then later on in the panel. After we have our last panelist, which I kindly like to invite to come up on screen, not on screen, Mr. Joseph Urban. Joseph is NESI chairman. At the same time, he's technology lead in the corporate CTO office of Nokia Bell Labs, responsible for technology strategy and security and software technologies. So, and we would like to invite you to share with us the NESI vision, please. Joseph.
Okay, thank you, Rolf, and good afternoon to all attendees of this session. I still need to switch now, it should work. And yeah, I want to contribute to this session with a short summary of a workshop that NESI was running just recently with the aim to identify emerging and enabling technologies in the area of software, data, and digital services for the coming years, and of course then also identifying what are the research needs in this area. So we clustered the outcome of this workshop into 9 technical areas and 6 non-technical areas. And yeah, I will pick up only a few aspects that are especially relevant for the theme of our session today, which is about Cloud Edge and IoT. But before I will go into these details, I want to make the point that one major challenge across all these areas is seen in the fact that the digital systems are becoming more complex and they are using extensively software. And therefore, there is a challenge to engineer this kind of complex and software-intensive systems in a way that supports integration and interoperability. Because in the integration and interoperability, there is the value. And of course, these systems needs also to be engineered in a way so that it allows managing the complexity in an efficient way. And I think coming back already to what Max said at the very beginning of the session around pilots and planned pilots in the work program, I think this aspect of integration and interoperability could be and should be actually one aspect that could be taken up and should be covered in these pilots. But now let's have a look into some of these technical areas, and obviously cognitive computing continuum is the most relevant for this session. This area, of course, include Edge, Cloud-Edge, Fog, IoT, but also this kind of specialized computing resources like HPC and in the future also quantum. And we think that this computing continuum should go beyond what we know today about clusters, Kubernetes clusters. So today we talk about cloud-native application designs and workload distributions. In the future, we probably should think about what we could call continuum-native application design. So really to design the applications running on this continuum in a way that is optimized to the continuum, and including then also the predictive infrastructure operation and management, programming abstractions of some specialized resources and a uniform software stacks that can be used in this continuum, and all together playing and integrated into some kind of an operating system for the computing continuum. So that was the main aspect in this area. And as already mentioned at the beginning and pointed out, integration, federation, and interoperability will be really a fundamental capability for engineering digital systems to deal with the diversity, heterogeneity, and security and scale of these complex systems, and running on top of the computing continuum. But the computing continuum as such is also actually quite a very complex and software intensive system, and therefore needs to deal with this kind of aspects. Open source software and data was also mentioned by Max at the beginning, therefore I've included it here also on this slide. It's clearly seen that open source is a well-established way to develop software, and it also facilitates interoperability. Again, this interoperability aspect, that's good. It's also used for setting de facto standards, open interfaces, and so on. And overall, it's definitely an engine of innovation. But it also requires a more differentiated view, as I've outlined this morning in the related session, because open source at the end is a tool that can be used for specific purposes, but it does not always fit to everything. And it requires, for example, that there is a community behind with common target, commonly shared in this community. So only in this case, if you have an active community, if this community is aligned with some industry interests, then it might be a good way, and it's definitely a very good way for running some open source activities. In addition, there are all these areas here listed as the additional areas play somehow into the area of Cloud Edge and IoT. But as I said, I will not go into the detail and pick up only a few aspects. One of this topic is related to automated software and service engineering. And I think it was already mentioned that it's also a key to provide the updates to the cloud computing and computing continuum platform. And it should need to go beyond cloud native, what we consider as cloud native. We also see that here the different technologies cannot anymore considered in isolation, but are intertwined. Software, AI, APIs, security. And Kai also mentions that software and hardware are getting closer, and the border between are getting blurred. So this kind of intertwining and yeah, I call it intertwining, needs really to be considered and taken into account. Human centricity, and cloud computing continuum should cover these kind of aspects: transparency, trust, and etc. Data, AI, ML, referring to the interplay. I mean, data and AML is essential. and also the interplay with the software. Digital twins might be an application that is running on top of Computing Continuum, but it can also be used to simulate the Computing Continuum for testing purposes. And it might result in, again, integration challenge to put the different twins together into super twins and ecosystems of twins. Quantum computing, I mentioned it already. It's not only about this new paradigm of computing, but at the end, quantum computing will be accessible in the computing continuum, and needs to play together with the classical computers, because quantum computing will not replace classical computers. And at the end, very important quality characteristics, including security and trust. It was already mentioned, this end-to-end view on security and trust, and also these aspects on sustainability. In addition, as mentioned at the beginning, we also pointed out these non-technical areas: openness, sovereignty, trust, ethics, skills, very important, and affordability. And all of them, what are common to them is that they actually will require a multidisciplinary research. And that brings me already to the conclusion, to the first bullet point here, that especially these kind of non-technical challenges and aspects requires this multidisciplinary research cutting across sociology, psychology, economics, and the law, etc. And that should be taken into account in the future working programs. And coming back again to these emerging, more complex software-intensive systems that also need to be supported by the computing continuum and the engineering of those systems, that these will be a main challenge, and challenge also to manage this complexity, and therefore these kind of aspects should be taken into account in the future work program, considering integration, federation, and interoperability as a fundamental key technologies that allows at the end also to create value out of the digital systems. So that ends, and back to you, Rolf.
Thanks, Joseph. I take away that software development is more and more interdisciplinary. We have more and more software-driven systems, and you have this convergence between software development and hardware development, already mentioned earlier. We had 3 points. One was open source, one was integration, federation, the interoperability of software, and the third one, the cognitive computing continuum, moving from cloud native to continuum native. I think that is sort of a theme we could take up in the panel. So while inviting everyone going to the panel, I would like to ask Verena to put up a Slido question, because picking up also on the first intervention we had, I would like to ask, what is Europe's differentiating factor? And the question for the Slido is, what are the most important mega trends for Europe's industry in the coming 5 to 10 years? So what is the most important one to prioritize?
Yes, Rolf, thank you very much. I just launched the Slido, and also in the chat, you should be able to see now the link to the Slido.
So we have 4 options: making resilient supply of microelectronic components, mitigation of climate change. Third one, strategic autonomy or partnerships to compete on global markets. And the last one, digital entrepreneurship and skills.
So you should be able to see the results.
Okay, the results are quite significant. Mitigation of climate change and reduction of carbon footprint is one of the key actions we have to prioritize in all our across different programs. before the strategic autonomy and international partnerships. Okay, I think that is already a result. And then I would like you to ask to launch the second Slido, which is the European industrial strategy has an objective to reducing its strategic dependencies, including in the area of edge and cloud computing. Hyperscalers are moving fast in the area of edge computing. What technology or other enablers would you consider to be most relevant for Europe to concentrate on for competing in an evolving data economy? And there you have a free choice of giving the words, and you get more time because I pass over to Micah to start with the panel discussion.
Thank you, Rolf. First, I think we will do two questions to our panelists, and then we'll try to take a couple of questions from the audience. So maybe starting with the first question, and I would like to direct it more particularly to Kai, Joseph, and Leo, who presented different research and investment priorities for Europe, and looking at how we will achieve them. The question would be, what are for you the key means in research and investment that we need to implement in order to build and preserve Europe's leadership in the data economy? So what is lacking? Maybe Leo, if you wanna start, and please be brief because we are a bit running late. Thank you.
Sure, I'll actually come back on some of the elements that were mentioned by Kai, which I didn't have a chance to touch upon. I really think if we have to outline one priority, one domain, it's around edge computing. And the reason I mentioned that is because I started talking earlier about the need to differentiate based on level of maturity. That's definitely an area where there's a huge amount of potential. I won't come back on all the elements that Kai presented. I think there's definite potential, and there's a huge gap to fill. But the time to fill that gap is going to close pretty soon. And if I'm more specific about areas that really need investment, if you take the cloud today, you've got a whole suite of services that are available, a whole suite of developer tools, especially platform as a service offerings in the cloud. Now, all of that is what is needed today, what generates the value from data in industrial circles. But to be able to do that in the industrial setting, you actually need to be able to do it in an edge setting. And by that, I really mean far edge, all the way to IoT devices. Those services, as they exist today, just simply cannot function on the kind of infrastructure and devices you have at the edge. And so there's a real huge opportunity to kind of rebuild, redevelop, and sometimes imagine just a completely different paradigm to make those services available at the edge. I would really outline that as a priority.
Thanks a lot, Leo. Very clear and concise. Kai, over to you. If you can outline one key priority in research and investment in view of building Europe's leadership.
The priority in investment, I would start, is perhaps for another perspective, not perhaps investment in regards to money, but perhaps the investment in regards to support for dealing with regulations for startups, because we see that one of the bigger challenges for startups is to handle all these regulations, which are especially connected in the AI area of handling data. And perhaps there could be investment and support for this digital entrepreneurship. One of the key research fields is perhaps that in Europe is very good in the area of hardware. We see, yes, in the United States has the big tech companies which also have hardware, but when we directly compare, we see a little bit a lack in the area of software skills, because without software we cannot use the hardware. This is also connected to my point of this cooperation between hardware and software communities.
Thanks, Kai. And I think this is definitely one of the key takeaways of this panel, the cooperation and fusion between software and hardware. And I saw that Joseph was nodding. So would you like to compliment Joseph briefly? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think in addition to this aspect of integration and interoperability and this intertwining of these different technologies, I fully support Kai that we should not forget about having the right skills and experts, knowing about all these technologies, because I mean, without them, we could have nice technologies and research, but not the people to bring it really to the practice.
Yeah. No, thanks for highlighting that. And I think skills and people is also one of the key goals that have been highlighted in the digital decade strategy of the Commission. So it's indeed very essential to point that out. Rolf, over to you for the next question.
Yeah, thank you, Maika. I think we heard two interventions, which was rather application agnostic, focusing on open source, on software development, and we had two convincing presentations which said, well, you know, at the end of the day, it's driven by the demand, by solutions driven by different applications. So operation in IT and OT, operation of connected automated vehicles, and was mentioned. And the question is, to what extent, you know, we should focus on R&I, or to what extent there's a need to focus on domain-specific, application-specific, demand-driven actions in the next framework program. What is your view, Hubert? What do you think?
Okay, so Rolf, I believe there are always an academic discussion, what is best, what to start. What I am interested to answer in your question, where is the demand coming from? Okay, we have been actively supporting the creation of data spaces in Gaia-X. And I would like to say now, we have convinced, with obviously the support of the German government, big automotive manufacturer to launch Catena-X. And now the problem is a very simple one. Gaia-X need to deliver what is needed by Catena-X to be ready on time on platform. I expect that a similar situation will happen in mobility, health, energy, and Industry 4.0 and manufacturing, meaning that I am very much of the opinion that we need first to get the opportunity to create those ecosystems and then to follow their demand, because the kind of tools they will need will be extremely urgent as soon as they have finished to understand their requirement. This is something, as I have tried to mention, which could be maybe specific to Europe, making us especially well positioned to prepare the right set of tools.
Thank you. So your point is that we need this sort of innovation actions to actually create the different ecosystems and the different domains. You mentioned production, mobility, and energy. Kai, do you have another view or complementary view on this?
I would agree, but at the same time, we also need to have looked a little bit what the other parts of the world are doing. Looking a little bit into the future, I had in my presentation in space, and many of us already know through Facebook the topic of the metaverse. And besides that, we have also this whole blockchain area, cryptocurrency area, which is not connected directly to any specific country, but there's a huge community working there, and it could be very well the case that it disrupts the finance system. Hence, we also, besides we need to differentiate a little bit. We have topic in the here and right and now, like for example, the automotive area, but we also have the topics of the future.
Good point. Any comments from the other panelists? If not, I pass the floor back to Maika.
Thank you, Rolf. Should we take a few questions maybe from the audience? I saw that there was one question regarding the alliance and the role of different initiatives in the alliance. The question was from Eddie Herzog. I think, why is there partnerships with GaiaX, BDVA, instead of them joining the alliance? And I think maybe briefly reacting on that, and then also I would gladly build on a question also to some of the panelists. But the key question or the key aspect here, as Pierre mentioned this morning, is that the alliance should definitely serve as a cooperation mechanism between different initiatives. And I think GaiaX is, of course, a prominent one. BDVA is another example. And there are many of those partnerships, I think, out there that should work together, create synergies. So in no way, of course, the aim of the alliance is to duplicate any of the work that is being conducted by already existing partnerships. And maybe just building on that, one question also maybe to Hubert would be indeed what, and coming from, from the GaiaX initiative, it would be interesting to hear your perspective. What opportunities and means do you see for cooperation between all the existing, initiatives that are out there? And I think recently GaiaX also, for instance, joined the Data Space Business Alliance. Maybe there are other, cooperations that are in the pipeline. So it would be interesting to hear your views on this very question of cooperation and synergies between all the initiatives out there.
Okay, so a quick answer to that. We have announced about 3 months ago that the 4 associations which are dealing with data will create this association between IDSA, which has created all the connector for data space, Fireware, which has created the ability to have open API, BDVA, which is big data value and analytics, and finally GaiaX. The objective is to have a common picture how to facilitate the creation of data spaces. And I see myself that all these associations, the oldest one, are existing for more than 5 years. GaiaX is 2 years old, and we need now to find a good way to work in between this alliance European Commission wants to create and already members which are existing in this association. We are extremely conscious, to answer your question, Micah, that if a company is belonging already to GaiaX and to IDSA, it does not make sense that they pay another set of fees to be participant to another association. It is our responsibility to get organized in such a way we simplify the life of those companies interested in those domains of data and cloud.
Thanks you very much, Hubert. Are there any other views from the other panelists on the cooperation between partnerships and the possible synergies that you see between existing initiatives and at European level? Any thoughts?
Maybe a few words on that, because we have seen now that these different technologies, AI, cloud, software, hardware, should not be researched and considered in isolation, but we really need to find some ways how we can really work together and address these cross partnership issues, perhaps in some dedicated calls of the work program, dedicated especially to this kind of topics or something in this direction.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. And indeed, I think the idea is also for the alliance to be operational by the end of the year. So of course, that's also, I think, a call for all interested organizations and representatives to apply to this strategic European stakeholder platform. Rolf, over to you if you want to address the final question.
Yeah, that's a fine question. And it was mentioned in the Digital Decade strategy that the Commission has a target of a deployment of edge nodes in 10,000 are given for the next generation of edge infrastructure. So how to do it? What, in your opinion, what are the key instruments to do that? I think we also heard there's a need for an open ecosystem to support the European infrastructure as well as particular focus on SMEs. So Leo, what do you think about what is the best way to address that, to make that happen?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I distinguish two parts in the answer. I think how to achieve the deployment. I'd actually start with development and then deployment of 10,000 carbon neutral, secure edge nodes across Europe. It requires some of the investments in research and development that I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to come back on, but really on developing the service layers that simply don't exist today. Making sure that the kind of service capabilities we've talked about today work with the constraints of the edge. That's one first focus. Second element is more around incentivizing deployment in a way that enables, let's say, a balanced geographical coverage around Europe. And I think that's where we got to talk about this as part of the work on the roadmap presented earlier. There needs to be a balanced approach and incentive towards especially geographies where you have a lot of industry, but not necessarily a lot of people today, and where you have this imbalance between the amount of demand that you'll have in a few years based on how edge computing will be used and the kind of coverage or limited coverage that you have today across Europe. And then the final element I just underline, it's a bit different, is you're asking which instruments. I would personally share actually that I think that there are already a number of instruments, and it's great to see that these actions are taking place, whether it's the IPCEI, some of the work programs we mentioned earlier, and also DEP announced yesterday. The key part is always going to be in execution, and here I'd really underline the importance, both from industry side and policy side, to be able to really work together on moving towards deployment and not being slowed down by, let's say, a willingness to anticipate the plan to such an extent that it slows down deployment. I think that's a really key element for Europe. We really need to make sure the execution works, and I really hope that industry via the Alliance will take a really active role in doing that.
Maybe that brings us back to the question how to synchronize that. If the Commission with the Digital Decade goes for 10,000 edge nodes, how to make sure that these are aligned with sort of the framework and standards, for instance, developed in Gaia-X? Yeah, Hubert.
I believe if we are not sorting out quickly the various federated services which we have defined in Gaia-X, the intention to install 10,000 edge will be really difficult to explain in terms of investment. So we absolutely need to have all the various services in terms of identification, in terms of security, in terms of compliance, ready and accepted by the various parts. That's why, for me, Rolf, the name of the game is a proper time synchronization between all these initiatives. Does not make sense to install nodes in a given position if we are not sure that they are properly protected and they can be used by different kind of data spaces. So for me, the urgency is really that we quickly arrive to the definition of a federated set of services, which will be proposed to the member of Gaia-X for a common architecture and respecting policy rules in terms of portability and interoperability. And we expect that after that, there will be starting, after we have reference implementation, to nurture the research of commercially available products, which I hope will be available in line with IPCEI.
That I take that, if there are no further comments, I take that as the last message and as a homework also for us, that there's a need.
I would like to add one last remark. What we shouldn't forget in this context is the infrastructure itself, also be it 5G, 6G, and so on. Sure. Because when you look over Europe, there's quite a gap between different regions, what is available on infrastructure which can be used by the edge nodes and makes them usable in the first place.
True.
Okay, I think I'll take that as well. I think there's if you talk about deployment of edge nodes, we need to look at the geographical balance, also, including the connectivity infrastructure. But I take home as a homework is, that if it develops open source components, if you develop software for continuum native systems, and if we have a framework defined by Gaia-X, which for federated set of services, we need to make sure that that will be developed in synchronization. I think we have to find a way in synchronization. Whether we do that and we are reference implementations like pilots, domain specific, to start with some specific domains, whether we announce some what we call minimal interoperability mechanisms to have a minimal common denominator, are you still there? Yes. That we have to find out, and maybe we can raise that question in the following panel. I think with that, I would like to thank warmly to all the panel members for your open discussion and for the tangible input. And I will close the panel and we move slowly to the next and second panel in this afternoon session, unless there are further comments. Thank you so much, and give you a clapping hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Clapping hands virtually, but also physically. Thank you so much, Rolf, also for pushing and pulling the whole scene in the last almost 1.5 hours. And now we are passing to the second part of the session. And we are a little bit late, so I think we have to catch up a little bit. So Rolf, again, the floor goes to you for the moderation of the next part.
Yeah, and I have the pleasure to do that again together with Micah. Maybe I pass the floor to Micah to work with the panelists.
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you, Rolf. So we'll start again with a few initial statements by 4 speakers. And I have the pleasure to give at the beginning the floor to Mrs. Monique Calisti, who is CEO of Martel Innovate. We have seen her several times throughout the event today. She is a passionate entrepreneur and ICT expert with hands-on experience in research and innovation, funding, strategic consulting, training, communication, social media, to name a few, and business development. She recently founded the nonprofit association Digital for Planets, and that is addressing the support to the design, development, and adoption of innovative and sustainable digital technologies. So Monique, the floor is yours, and thank you for being brief and concise.
Monique, you're muted.
You're muted, Monique, if you can unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry. I have a presentation. I had planned to give a presentation. I will try to fly through some main points. Actually, today I'm trying to give an overview from a number of activities that we are running together with my team across the IoT/Cloud-Edge scene. Actually, in particular, I'm coordinating a project that is called EU IoT that is at work to build a strong European IoT and edge ecosystem. And I think, as we have heard today from several discussions and presentations, it's essential to indeed have an ecosystem approach. In particular, a value chain approach to improve European leadership in the global data economy as an essential aspect to achieve Europe's digital autonomy. In particular, we've heard different presentations today and different viewpoints that present both the supply and demand side, and this is absolutely necessary to make sure that there is convergence, especially addressing vertical legacy aspects, both in terms of regulations and policies. Another very important aspect that we would like to stress is the empowerment also of smaller companies and startups to engage with large projects. The whole European economy is largely depending on a very high number of small enterprises. We have to make sure that they can participate to this ecosystem and that the barriers for contributions and participation are lowered. In terms of direction of travel, I would like just to spend a couple of words on aspects that have been touched upon and that we need to reiterate. First of all, the importance of openness that goes beyond open source. In fact, it embraces open data, open standards, open hardware, and it enforces key values that are at the core of the European democracy. And in particular, we also believe that besides the openness, what it's important is to make sure that there is a way to leverage on the presence and proliferation of different communities. We've heard today that there are a few, there are several, and we cannot imagine to just artificially build a meta community on top of them. What we need is to enforce a real, let's say, distributed intelligent mechanism so that these bodies coordinate across different domains and research communities. Because only in this way it will be possible to really leverage across the progress that is made in these different communities. Also, very important is to understand that there are aspects that go beyond technology. We repeated that several times today. It's not just about pushing forward progress across a number of technological domains. The key idea is really to meet societal, environmental, and market needs. So we need to have also multidisciplinary and inclusive perspective in this path. Within the EU IoT project, we have been conducting some research work on main investigation themes ahead of us for the, let's say, Cloud-Edge-IoT community. And obviously, it's more than these three group of technologies that are involved. It includes AI, as we heard, hardware evolution, microelectronics, next generation wireless networks, and so on and so forth. But we have focused in particular in four main areas. There are the computing continuum infrastructure, then the various shades of edge from near to far edge. Then the part that is more directly related to human IoT interfaces, so really the machine to human frontier, and finally the data spaces. There's not going to be much time because I know I have to fly through. So I just would like to say that the slides will be made available, and in the slide what we try to capture, and it's explained also in a more extensive document that will be actually published towards the end of November in the ngiot.eu website. We have identified several areas thanks to the consultation with several experts. So I will just quickly go through these points because there's not much time. What I would like to conclude is with the following observations. So first of all, it's obvious that to make sure that Europe become competitive at the global level in the data economy, we need to avoid fragmentation of efforts in Europe. We have a lot of different communities, as we've heard, but we need to create synergies and foster stronger cooperation. At the same time, especially after the pandemic crisis we have to make sure that we boost industrial competitiveness, that we sustain a fast economic recovery and growth for all European member states. We need also to ensure that while the digital transformation empowers citizens, it also protects our environment. We very well know that while ICT can be part of the solution, it can also be a big part of the problem in terms of energy consumption. So these are various fronts on which the European community is called to act to ensure digital autonomy and technological sovereignty. I think that events like this one, but also more hands-on workshops in which we give the possibility to different players in different communities are going to be essential to create a real, let's say, value within the ecosystem, that it's finally always going to be a system, or let's say a network of networks, because it's always going to be the case that there will be these different communities. And while we've heard that important investments are planned by the European Commission on the public side, we also know that we very much need to foster investments also on the private side across a number of industrial domains. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Sorry, I had to fly a little bit through some slides, but they will be made available.
Thank you very much, Monique, much appreciated. And if there are 3 keywords maybe from your presentation, I think it could be openness, creating synergies, and the need also to invest towards, I think, societal values. And of course, one key priority that I think also the audience supported before was environment and reaching climate neutrality goals. With that, I would give the floor to our next speaker, Koen de Bosrier. Sorry for the bad presentation. You're a professor of computing systems at the Ghent University in Belgium and head of the electronics department. And your research interests include computer architecture, systems, software, code optimization, and software security. Since 2008, you're a coordinator of the HIPAC initiative, the first network of computing system researchers in Europe. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
And you can also see the slides. Okay, thank you. So I'm indeed the HIPAC coordinator since 2008. And I'm going to briefly, well, first give an overview for those who might be less familiar with HIPAC. So we are a network, and our mission is to advance the computer system research and development as a discipline in Europe. So that's our core mission. And we want to do this by bridging the gap between industry and academia, and also between different communities, hardware, software, and data communities. So we are at the computing systems layer, as we call it. So you see here the European Processor Initiative. You see accelerators, etc., tools to program them. We are not, our focus is not the technology itself, not the CMOS technology, not the semiconductors, and not the application domains. We have members in that area too, but that's not our core focus. We are a network. We have around 800 members, and together with their colleagues and students, we are a network of about 2,500 specialists in computing systems in Europe. We cover almost 500 institutions in 50 countries, but most of them are, well, all the 27 of Europe, of course, the Union, and a little bit beyond that. We do not charge a membership fee. We are, technically speaking, coordination and support action at this moment, so that's where we get the money from. One of the deliverables of the CSA is a vision document. Some people also call it a roadmap. And we have been doing this for many years. It's a biannual document. The last edition is the 2021 edition. And that's the one I'm going to present today, or just an overview. We are now working on a small update, which will be published in January 2022, and there will be a new version in 2023, also in January. So that's what the vision is. What is the structure of the vision? It's a bit different from classical roadmaps. So this is a document. It's a 180-page document. And we end actually, or we start with recommendations at the technical level, the global policy level, and also at societal level. So we make not only technical recommendations, but also policy recommendations and societal recommendations. And the document itself is split into 4 dimensions. There is a technical dimension, there's a business dimension, so we look at the impact of technology on the businesses. There's also a societal dimension where we look at the impact of technology on society. And then there is also a clear European dimension. So we look at the strengths and the weaknesses of Europe in documents. The document itself consists of a number of opinion papers written by experts of our network. So for instance, we had one on Computing Continuum. We also got one on Guardian Angels, which is a moonshot project that we propose. And it goes on like this. This is the one on the SWOT of Europe, for instance. So this is how the document is structured. Important for us is that, and that was a request from the Commission many years ago, where they asked us also please look at societal impact and also make policy recommendations. And to show in one single slide what that means is the following. So today, I think we have been talking about the future of technology here in Europe, smart cities, the cloud, fog, edge, etc. And that's the world where we live in. And from time to time, we also mention sustainability and carbon neutrality. But there's another reality for many people, and it's this reality. Also in Europe and also outside Europe. And that's a reality that we often forget in our discussions when we are having technical discussions, but it also exists. And it is also influencing political systems in the world at this moment. So that's just to give you an idea what you are covering in this roadmap. It's a bit special from other roadmaps, from other associations and partnerships, I think. I'm going to briefly go through the recommendations that we made in 2021. So this recommendation has already been touched briefly this morning by Marc Duranton, who is the coordinator of the vision. So we want to go from CPS to 5S CPS square. And the 5S stand for, well, 5 non-functional properties. Sober is low power consumption, secure, it's clear, safe is also clear. That's for the ones that interact with the physical world. There's also straightforward and sustainable, and straightforward is about complexity. And we believe here we have to make the systems as simple as possible so that it can be managed and designed and developed by humans. And if that's not possible, we should have tools to help us. And something which has not yet been mentioned, I think, today quite often is the fact that there are efforts ongoing, especially in the US, but also in Europe, on automatic programming. GPT-4 is used for that, so that you can just give your specifications and the system is writing the software for you. So in order to coordinate all the things that we want to do in the cloud, the edge system, the fog, etc., maybe that's the way forward. We should not underestimate what the impact of this technology could be also in the future, and we should not give it away, I think, to the Americans or the Chinese. Sustainability is another one. I already mentioned it, and today I heard a lot we want to be climate neutral, but sustainability is much more than climate neutral. It's also about recycling technology, etc. At this moment, the electronics that we produce are hardly recycled, and if you recycle them, we extract something like 15 out of 60 minerals, which is a very low number. We don't have a lot of raw materials here in Europe, so this is a very important aspect. And we also think that there is a need for much better models. There was an article a couple of 1 year ago, I think, from the Shift project, where they said, well, watching half an hour of Netflix movie produces the same amount of carbon as driving your car for 6 kilometers. This is just not true. This is based on wrong models. And I think we need to have much better models to assess the impact of our technology on climate, on the environment. And that's that's something that is lacking. There are no good models at this moment. The CPS square has been explained by Mark already this morning. I'm not gonna do that again. And then it's maybe interesting for my 2 last slides to also look at the policy recommendations. So these are recommendations that we make and are directed to the European Commission, but also to the funding agencies in the countries, the European countries. So one recommendation we made in 2020, actually, to be published in 2021, is to invest in open source hardware and software. I think we heard today that this is indeed a very important topic, so we can acknowledge that this is indeed important. What we also recommend is not to forget about the emerging technologies. We can use standard CMOS, etc., but there are also other technologies being developed. Quantum is one of them, neuromorphic, etc. We should not forget about them for 2 reasons. First of all, we want to be at the forefront, but also we want to build capacity. We want to have the expertise in Europe in these technologies, so that by the time they become mainstream, that we also can be present in this area. And then there's also a moonshot project. I'm not going to explain it. It's called Guardian Angels. It's a kind of personal assistant, which is more loyal to the owner than to the company that produced the personal assistant. And then the societal recommendations, I think they also are congruent with what we saw today in different other presentations. Is well, first of all, maybe that wasn't mentioned yet, but we think Europe would benefit from a couple of international competence centers in computing. So we have one called CERN in particle physics, we have ESA for space. We do not have a real competence center, international one, a European one in computing. We have some local ones in countries, but having one at a global European level would help to attract talent and to also steer our efforts and to break out of the silos, for instance. Also, solid European digital infrastructure for the 5G, 6G, it has already been mentioned, that's very important. Also the 10,000 edge nodes is part of that. Training, we lack IT workers a lot. So we have to stimulate more people to take STEM degrees, but also invest in lifelong learning to retrain people. There is a shortage of people, of workers at this moment. We have a jobs website. We have seen the number of open positions this year is double the one of the previous 3 years. So that's. Sorry,
I will need to ask you to conclude.
Yes,
sorry, thanks.
It's my
thanks a lot.
Innovation culture is another one. It has already been mentioned, and also the European values, very important. I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think that was a very comprehensive overview, I mean, of technical policy, societal recommendations, with also, I think, again, important key message aligned with previous discussions, the conversions between software and hardware, the need to look at the whole value chain, including electronics. I also really liked your recommendation on sustainability and the need indeed to find ways to measure actually the impact that we're having on society. And I think that's also a very important aspect in view of our digital decade objective and edge deployments, where we want them to be climate neutral, but how do we measure that? So thanks a lot. I pass now on the floor to Lars Nagel from the Data Spaces Business Alliance that we already briefly mentioned in the previous discussion. Lars Nagel, hello, you're the CEO of the International Data Space Association. Your main fields of work are innovation management, network engagement, and technology transfer. You represent here today the Data Spaces Business Alliance, which is a new collaboration that has been recently launched between the partners BDVA, Fireway, IDSA, and Gaia-X. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I hope everything is fine. You can hear me, you can see my slides.
We cannot yet, at least I cannot yet see your slides.
Not yet.
No.
Okay.
Maybe you can try again, Lars. Just stop again and try again.
Yeah, it's challenging. Okay, I'll try again.
Does it? Yeah. It's still black for us. Ah, there we go. Perfect. And now in full screen.
Okay, so sorry for that.
Can you still make it full screen, please?
Okay, yeah, it's challenging with the, okay.
In the down right corner, there's this little monitor, and if not, leave it. I think it's fine. Yeah, and now switch windows in the second button on the top.
Is there full screen now?
No, it's good. No, it's good. Thank you, Lars.
Okay, so hello. I'll be quick. Where do we stand in the context of data spaces? We've heard about data spaces since 2019, with the data strategy, and with International Data Spaces Association, we are on our way since 6 years. But now we see that data spaces truly become reality. It's now time to master the next evolutionary step. So really from a lot of convincing use cases, so it's all fine, but these were only few-to-few data sharing, data exchange scenarios, towards now real data spaces. So many-to-many data sharing, end-to-end data sharing, really hundreds, thousands of companies sharing data, and following clear business impact. Not only staying in research and innovation games, but really leaving and striving for business impact. And we see with Smart Connected Supplier Network in the Netherlands, with Catena X, or mobility data space endeavors where really hundreds and thousands companies are participating and creating value together. So today we want to talk about, well, what is to do in the next years. So when we talk about data spaces, well, this is the to-do list. So at the core of everything is trust. So this is the basis of data spaces. So we have to really work on identity management. So we have eIDAS, yes, but we need to federate all of this, so self-sovereign identities, for example. And we definitely have to work on certification for components and runtime environments, and also prove this via test beds and certification. Second, we have to work on security on every end. So I think that is clear, but also to indicate usage policies and enforcement of usage constraints at data sets to really safeguard data as economic assets. Then we have to, well, make data a tradable good. So we have to describe data, broker it, and describe it. We have to make sure that all data endpoints are really interoperable. That has already been mentioned by Hubert. And then we also have to see how to add apps, applications to this ecosystem. So how to process data, but also remote execution of services. So that at the end, we can really realize data markets. And therefore, we have to work on clearing and billing mechanisms and also operating models for data spaces and data markets. What we need at the end is a soft infrastructure, which is the baseline, the foundation for all data spaces in all domains. So that at the end, we will have 1,000 of data spaces which are nested, which are overlapping, which are combinable. So that is the beauty with data spaces, as highly
federated, super distributed peer-to-peer approach, which is relying on one infrastructure as we do have in the mobile communication with GSM, for example. And so we can all roam with our mobile phones from one country to the other and we don't see what's happening. And such a soft infrastructure for data will also be invisible to the data space participants. It's just there and it will work because we have solved all the problems, all the functional and non-functional requirements, which we have already talked about. So we have to work on that. Some short words on International Data Spaces Association. So we have been working on this as a non-profit organization with 140 members since years on an open standard for data spaces. We can attestate conformity to the standard by a formal certification. We also reflect on how to run data spaces. So from a rule book perspective, we provide all the code and components in an open source repository, which can be reused and eases life of data spaces. And well, we do a lot to really make data spaces happen. We are not the only ones on stage. So there are a lot of other organizations in Europe which work on data spaces. And what we need to really make data spaces happen and to leave impact is a common framework for data spaces, which combines everything which we do have. So from Gaia-X over BDVA, IDSA, Zitra, also My Data, the Data Sharing Coalition, Fireware, all of this. And we have to assemble this to one common data spaces framework. We are doing this currently. We have come up with a paper, Design Principles for Data Spaces, in a version 1, beginning of this year altogether. And we are continuously working on these generic building blocks which form these common data spaces framework. And well, I'm also representing here the Data Spaces Business Alliance. So we learned in the last 2 years that we work so closely together so that we decided to team up to speak with one voice. And so BDVA, Fireware, Gaia-X, and IDSA, and that we work on this common framework so that that a company does not have to distinguish, well, do I need to use this and that? No, we need one an integration of technology and concepts and architectures so that it eases the life for everyone. And that is my last slide here. You can see at the bottom left part of it, the work plan of the Data Space Business Alliance. So we work on the framework, we work jointly on long-term enablers to really bring this into standard and innovation. We work on transparency and visibility of data space endeavors, and we definitely want to deploy data spaces. And therefore, so these are the 7 action items. So we need this common data space framework as a common set of rules and design principles that then we need to know what's going on in Europe. So there are so many endeavors, and if we really want to benefit on an economic scale, we have to bring this together to form really powerful data spaces. So we need a radar and a maturity level assessment to scout where are the really cool data spaces which leave impact in the next month. Once we have scouted them, we have to work closely together with them according to the common data spaces framework. So coming up with project transition guides and making use of the open source components, which we are developing in IDSA, which are already available in Fireware, which will be available in Gaia-X, for example, the Gaia-X Federation services, so that we can use running code, reuse templates also for smart contracts, for example, from the Zitra achievements with the EHAN testbed in Finland, and then finally bring data spaces into operation. And therefore, we also have to talk about, okay, what is continuity models for data spaces? Where are the startups which really initiate and run data spaces? So the essential services, base data services in these data spaces. Well, that is to do, and I'm happy to discuss further with you.
Thank you very much, Lars, for the presentation and the work you're doing on data spaces. So indeed, we mentioned before the reason why we need to deploy the Cloud-to-Edge Continuum is, of course, to enable demand, and in particular, the need for sharing data in this regard. It's very important to see that all initiatives are coming together to work on these common generic building blocks. And it also joins our point earlier about the need to indeed coordinate between all existing initiatives. So with that, I would like to give the floor to our last presentation today from Ovidio Vermeesen from AIoTI. He's the chair of the research cluster. Ovidio, are you with us? Yes, he's I see him. Okay, very good. So I will briefly present you. So you're working for SINTEF in the Department on Connectivity Technologies and Platform, and you're also editor of a book with the title Artificial Intelligence for Digitizing Industry. And you're here today, I think, in your quality of the chair of the IoTI working group on IoT research and partnerships. The floor is yours, Ovidio. We cannot hear you for now. I don't know if you're speaking. We see your slides, but we cannot hear you, I think.
Ovidio, your mic is open, but yeah, maybe open again. Did you enable your audio settings? Ovidio, maybe you rejoin the Zoom meeting and we move on, Micah, quickly.
Yeah,
else? Yeah?
Sure. I mean, we can give Ovidio some time to reconnect, maybe in the meantime. So we had prepared a few Slido question as well as question for the panelists. Of course, we are running a bit late, so I'm also looking at my colleague Rolf. Rolf, maybe we can run one Slido question.
Yeah, maybe we can run one Slido.
Yeah. And have in the meantime one or two questions to our panelists.
Yeah, I just started the Slido, and you can click on the link.
Okay, so please open the Slido.
So the Slido question is related to what priority would you assign to European cloud edge technology investments in the following 5 years? You've heard about some industrial applications. We heard about industrial needs as well as an urgency to act. So what is your opinion about it?
Do you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, we hear you. Great.
Okay, so just a moment. I will prepare the presentation and then you can finish this first.
I think it's fine, Ovidio. You could go ahead, and in the meantime, people have time to look at this Slido. So please share your screen. Yeah.
Now you can see the screen and you can hear me. Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So my presentation focus on the priorities for IoTI, the Alliance for Internet of Things Innovation. And first of all, very important for us to look at what is the IoT Edge overview from our part, what are the key research and innovation elements that we are addressing, what are the needs, priorities, and what are the challenges and gaps. So first of all, if I'm starting with the IoT Edge overview, for us, we see the IoT Edge as a mesh network of intelligent IoT devices using IoT Edge platforms, including artificial intelligence and inference processes that analyze, store information locally, close to the data sources, and communicate and exchange information with other edge devices, and are part of the computing continuum with cloud platforms and data centers. As you notice, I put clearly store information locally. So this, from the point of view at Edge, is the creation of this 1,000, 10,000 probably data spaces that will be correlated to the edge computing units and capabilities. And as you see on the right side, probably in the future, each of these application area will have a small data space and data space enlarged and centralized, that they will connect and exchange the data. So if we are looking from the research point of view, we see the edge computing IoT paradigm in a way having a granular consistency with elements that are happening at the micro edge, elements that are happening at the deep edge, and the meta edge. In addition, we see in this continuum the part related to MEC, the mobile access edge computing part related to the implementation of 5G and future 6G connectivity paradigm. And then we have the fog, far edge, and the cloud and data center. From the association, from the IoTI, we are focusing mostly on the three areas, but we have clearly very strong cooperation with the SNS partnership related to MEC and the fog, and with other partnerships related to cloud. So in this way, we cover the edge cloud continuum. So if you look then on some of the elements in the our research and innovation priorities, we see that more and more as we move to the edge, the part of the collective and collaborative intelligence of things is becoming more important. We have more and more autonomous systems that we have to consider. And the IoT Edge Continuum is as well a very important element within these three areas. So implementing the collective behavior of physical and virtual artificial intelligence things, because as we see, we will have, in addition to the physical things, a number of digital twins that will mirror the activities of the physical entities. And these have to be implemented as well in a decentralized and distributed manner. So this creates as well the push for new ways of implementing Internet of Things. We are talking about Internet of Robotic Things, Internet of Intelligent Mobile Things, Internet of IoT device colonies of things. So these are elements that are very important for us to address. We see that in this evolution, the intelligence becomes federated and distributed, and then a number of important elements have to be addressed in the IoT application, like localization, privacy, security, efficiency, latency, autonomy, that are elements that are part of the future IoT applications. Then, if we are thinking of what are our needs and priorities from the point of view of IoTI, we see that, first of all, we are aiming for large-scale integration of IoT edge platforms. This is an important element to prove and demonstrate the capabilities of the IoT and edge computing technologies. Then we have another important priority on edge autonomous systems. IoT edge device routing, schedule, and clustering, it's another important element. Federated learning in the concept of fleets. Then the emergence of IoT swarms and the combination with IoT edge and distributed intelligence. It's an important element, plus the computing scalability. I will come back to this on the gaps. multi-agent intelligence IoT distributed edge platforms, an important need and priority for the future. Then if we consider that many of the autonomous IoT edge system will have a kind of self-X capability, like self-healing, self-organizing, these are important elements that have to be addressed in order to implement the collective intelligence of the fleets of these autonomous devices. Then, as the number of IoT devices will increase, the green IoT and edge IoT priority is very important, because we don't want to move from a centralized maybe cloud paradigm with very large energy consumption to a paradigm that will copy and consume the same energy, but this time distributed. We want as well to decrease the energy consumption and the efficiency of the connectivity and exchange of information between these distributed devices. And of course, in order to implement these devices, we have to address the open source hardware and software, which is very important in order to accelerate the deployment of these devices. Then if I move to the last slide on challenges and gaps, we see that one element that is very important, that I'll focus on this one, and from this one we generate all the other needs. It's the scalability. So actually we are talking about increasing the number of devices. We are talking about 10,000, 100,000, 5,000 devices. At the same time, fleets of thousands of devices that will cooperate. So scalability is a very important element in order to address security, intelligence, heterogeneity, edge processing, federated learning, swarm intelligence, collaborative and cooperative intelligence. So all these are capabilities of the nodes or of the systems, but they have to be seen in from the point of view of scalability. And here we see a huge gap that we consider that can be addressed by large-scale pilots on IoT and edge computing and pilot actions in multi-IoT edge computing. I put as well some of the challenges on the mobile IoT edge platforms, IoT Edge Orchestrator, simulation platforms that will combine the physical and the virtual part, so the digital twins, the combination of these two elements that will coexist in the future IoT edge applications. The large-scale IoT mesh networks, how we address them. And here we have to consider that for these mesh networks, we will not have only one continuum element, will be a continuum X elements that we call it, will be, and the X means you need the processing, continuum computing, continuum security, continuum connectivity, continuum privacy. All these have to be addressed, and consider that the real time will be much more important for the IoT application at the edge. At the same time, we have to see the forecasting and amplifying IoT device intelligence to take collective decisions. So our last point is large-scale pilot actions in order to address the challenges that we see for IoT Edge.
Thanks a lot, Ovidio, and I think this ties nicely to the priorities that have been also identified by my colleagues for the work programs next year. Without further ado, I will hand over to Rolf to announce the Slido or show us the Slido questions. And then we can move to one or two questions for our panelists.
Yeah, I think we asked for the priority of investments, and we see a priority 4 out of 5 out of scale of 5. Majority thinks, well, it's a high priority, but it's not the highest priority, meaning that there are the edge computing has a midterm range rather than really a short-term range, and there's still some hurdles to be overcome eventually in the application domains. And then I would go back to the word cloud, which we had there. We asked for the industrial strategy. And within that, what are the technology enablers that would you consider to be most relevant? And we see here interoperability of the different frameworks and systems. I think that goes in line, which was said in the previous panel, that we need a multi-stakeholder approach, that we need, nobody can do it alone, so we need a collaboration, which requires interoperability across different stakeholders, but also across different domains. We see also open source, which was frequently mentioned in many of the presentations. One of the Europe's selling position could be that open source component where we build a community around that, and we talked about open source for hardware as well as software components. AI, ML is mentioned. Data ecosystem has been very strong also in the first panel, and is also strong in this panel. We may take it up, how to build it up for Europe. And then you see containers. Containers is mentioned in the morning panels and is mentioned in the afternoon panels. It was not specifically addressed in the discussions though, but appears that is one of the enablers and driving technologies for convergence or for the frameworks at the edge next to data sharing and data interoperability.
Many thanks, Rolf. So should we, Rolf, do we have time for one or two panel questions?
Yeah, I think we should do, yes.
Yeah, okay. So maybe going to your first question for our panelists is again looking at the work program for next year, 2023-24. You all presented, let's say, a quite comprehensive research agendas. If you could pick, let's say, one or two key priorities in research and investment where we should absolutely focus on to bridge the gap between central and decentralized data and intelligence, what would it be? And please be brief. Monique, maybe we can start with you following.
Maybe you take account to the word cloud which we presented. Maybe you make some reference on that one as well.
Yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we've put together together with a couple of colleagues. We've put together a few items. We believe that it's definitely necessary to invest more on data tagging, data cleansing. There's no artificial intelligence without appropriate data pipelines. Then also in model interpretability in the convergence between the physical and the digital. Causal reasoning and causal graphs as potential and as well as potential outcomes methods. And in particular also AI and machine learning enable low power hardware to really be able to move intelligence to the far edge. Obviously, it's very important also that we invest more on verifiability, transparency, and trustworthiness of software and data processing. And finally, also what we believe it's necessary is to move learning, distributed machine learning up to what we call swarm learning. So essentially, the idea is that while in federated learning, you have somehow you have an element which is common, that is the model of the federation, while in the so-called swarm learning, actually, there's not a common model of the federation of the various agents or software components that interact. So the idea is really to move even farther with the decentralized, let's say, learning approach.
Okay, thanks a lot. That's already quite a comprehensive list. Koen, would you like to join some of the priorities that were mentioned by Monique, or would you like expand the list further?
Well, from our point of view, I think orchestration is very important, but that is linked with interoperability, I think, to some extent. I think we would also like to focus on automation of software production and configuration. So I think if we want to have more dynamicity, I think we need to invest more in this kind of tools. AI and machine learning is obviously very important. And then also the elephant in the room, I would say, is sustainability, for which we do not have real solutions today. I think that's also something we suggest to focus on.
Thanks a lot. Lars, how is it from your perspective?
Yeah, just to add perhaps to other aspects. So we should really focus on experimentation, so clear test bed, so that we really can ensure interoperability and really bring players together. So data spaces are a multi-stakeholder endeavor, and therefore we have to test that, and we have to show and prove that. And the other thing is so how to run and operate it. So really thinking in these networking effects, how to run these complicated ecosystems, and that is a bit underrepresented, I would say.
Thanks a lot. Very practical perspective. Ovidio, to close the round.
Right. So from our point of view, as we mentioned, edge computing is by definition a distributed architecture. So actually we have to build up on this distributed architecture and see how we can amplify, as I mentioned, IoT device intelligence to take collective and cooperative decision. This is a very important element for the future. The other element is how we still develop this multi connectivity mesh networks that will exist in edge computing. What are the elements that are needed in order to preserve the real time and to have the kind of granularity of real time that will be applied at different levels of the edge computing? And how we introduce more and more the swarm intelligence, but combined with the existing legacy system and the edge computing, and I would say the new kind of implementation of the how we call it, just a moment to think about the part related to federated learning.
Many thanks.
Yes.
Thanks for giving a snapshot of what you think are the key priorities. I will hand over to Rolf for another question to our panelists.
Yeah, data ecosystems was mentioned in the word cloud, and also it was mentioned earlier on. I would like to ask, what do you see as the most important aspects for the innovation actions, and what are the means to sustain or to build up such an ecosystem in the future data economy? So just to make it explicit again.
If I may go quickly, we have identified basically 4 items. The first one is, open source, open data, open hardware, open community must be enforced and must ensure that there is a significant network effect in terms of exchange of know-how, technologies, and data. Then another point, it's about ecosystem, the value of ecosystem. So an ecosystem by definition needs to be grown. Well, by definition, actually, we believe that the way in which we can really nurture and evolve already existing communities is to enforce this ecosystem as a network of networks. Finally, it's necessary to enforce knowledge sharing, but also training on value systems and processes that can help contributing to open source projects and open standards. So it's not obvious to all players how to contribute to open standards and open source. So we have to invest on this. Also, another point is to be able to combine properly bottom-up versus top-down approaches, because it's always going to be the case that there are movements and de facto standards and contributions in the community, but there's also going to be policy-related aspects, regulation-related aspects, and somehow they need to meet at the level at least of some infrastructural pillars and let's say key enablers to unleash really innovation to happen. So yeah, this is the 4 main points we have identified.
Comments, Lars?
Yeah, well, I would like to add. So we really have to work on convergence of what we have built and come up with so far. So convergence of architectures, convergence of technologies, convergence of well, open source activities with what we do have, so that we no longer end up with a zoo of solutions where data spaces which are on their way get lost, but that we have a clear path forward, and that we really make these, well, data spaces happen. And what we always should consider, so these are really, really large animals, right? So it's not, so a large scale pilot in the European landscape is something big, but when we talk about data spaces, we talk about thousands of participants, and there are ecosystem and networking effects which we still have to learn and to understand how that works.
Okay, so I understood, particularly from your talk as well, that convergence can be achieved by what you designed, a path for a common cookbook, where you need to seek agreement across different national initiatives, across different industrial initiatives and existing data spaces, right?
Yeah.
And for that,
cookbooks
you need
and recipes. Yeah.
We need sort of some testing, or we need some demonstration in order to validate the common understanding, right?
Perfect.
Okay, Koen, any comments?
Kun, you're on mute. Can you unmute, please?
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
So there's one more thing I would like to add, which is a concern which lives in the hype community, and that's the access to data. So we see that both in the US, but also especially in China, companies who want to innovate, they can have access to almost any data they want. But in Europe, this is all very much regulated by GDPR, also medical data, etc., which might actually slow us down in the development of new applications. It might become very important in the future, especially, for instance, with medical data. There are cases known that companies cannot train their models because they do not have access to the data. So maybe Europe should also work on regulations in order to help industry to innovate in this space.
Maybe a quick comment on that one, because I just, because that came to my mind. We had this discussion in the morning. Even edge computing or swarm computing does not get rid of this problem, because you may have swarm computing across harmonized entities, which you can implement, which actually is not the norm. So mainly you also have that between heterogeneous, where you need data exchange, you need sort of some costs, or you need a contractual agreement between the entities outside in the swarm before they can interact. So you can have it on the global level, where you talk about regulatory frameworks to get access to data, but you also have it on the micro level, on the swarm level. Otherwise, the swarm will not interact. That was a quote from this morning. We didn't have Ovidio. Are you still around?
Yes.
Oh,
so
yes.
Actually, for our point of view, I think an important element that summarize the challenges that we will have is scalability. And scalability includes, if we can demonstrate scalability. We can have the proof of pudding by demonstrate it in pilots or large-scale projects. The possibility of scaling, having all these challenges related to interoperability, security, multi-agent, intelligent distributed edge platforms, the heterogeneity of devices, and very important energy efficiency and the green IoT that will hunt us in the next years. So very important to put scalability as an aim, a goal, and around this we have to demonstrate that the technologies that we are developing are matching. Energy, scalability, we have the heterogeneity, we have the data and data spaces, we have to consider as well a scalability there. And this can be done only by demonstrators, by large-scale pilots and pilot actions.
So your quote was that the pilot actual demonstrators have to include sort of the creation of an ecosystem to demonstrate the scalability. Otherwise,
exactly, it's part of the, yes, it's an embedded requirement. And we have the experience in IoT with large-scale pilots. I think it was a good experience. We learn what we should not do, but we learn that actually there are many benefits from these large-scale pilots.
Good. An open ecosystem as an embedded integral part of any pilot action. I'll put that down. Any other comments? Otherwise, I put back the floor to Micah.
Thank you, Rolf. If there are no further questions, so we already addressed the question on the cooperation between different, I think, ecosystems. And for us, maybe another question we had was the fact that how you see, I think in particular, coming back to cooperation, how would you see in particular, the alignment between the different partnerships now, in particular in the area of the Cloud-to-Edge IoT continuum? What are the key aspects, I think, where different ecosystem needs to cooperate when you look at this continuum going from the cloud to the IoT aspect? How do you align the cooperation across the different partnerships in this area?
Well, that's a very tricky question, and I'm not sure there is a unique way to answer that, because there's a lot of also dynamicity in the scene. There's a lot of initiatives that are at different level of maturity in their evolution. In any case, what it's needed it's to agree across different organizations, across different bodies, on common elements to avoid fragmentation that finally would just slow down the whole technological evolution and capability to bring this technological evolution to the market effectively. Clearly, this, I think, and we've heard that today, we have seen also from the slides presented by Max, that in fact, in 2023, 2024, we really need to have a more verticalized somehow scope, at least for some of the calls. In a way, in line with what happened in Horizon 2020 with the IoT large-scale pilots, because these were really much kinds of projects in which different players, also from vertical domains, could work together with suppliers, let's say technology suppliers. So in a way, vertical here, of course, it shouldn't be intended as use case specific, but rather as industry or market segment related. And what we believe, and what we've heard also today, is that we need really to create bridges between research and innovation with deployment adoption. So create bridges between Horizon Europe calls and Digital Europe calls. These might could be a playground where several of these associations or initiatives will meet. Clearly, pre-commercial procurement and innovation actions for close to the market initiatives will also be very important, especially for the industrial focused fora. And for smaller players, it's going to be necessary to also leverage on instruments like EIC, European IC Innovation Council funding. So actually, it's very much about creating a common strategy ultimately.
Thanks a lot, Monique. Complex question, but you provided quite some clear elements. I mean, on the verticalization and the need for synergies between research programs and deployment and adoption programs. And Lars, I would be curious to hear also your perspective, you know, coming more from, let's say, the use cases or the data spaces side. Where do you see, and do you see synergies, you know, between the different communities working, I mean, more on the cloud to edge IoT aspects and the data spaces on the other side?
Yeah, well, that's essentially what I've presented. So we've already started on that path to create convergence in a certain area. So I would like to add to Monique, we need to go two paths. So on a horizontal layer, we have to go for convergence. So have these cookbooks, so something common to be reused. And then we really have to push for deployment in the vertical. So I like that comment a lot, to combine Horizon Europe and Digital Europe work programs. So that's great. So the other question, well, if you have a look at the Gaia X, then it depicts more or less, well, the whole landscape of data economy, right? So we have the smart service scenarios, the AI at the very top, then we have the data spaces to, well, have the pool of data and make all of this happen. This is somehow run and processed and stored on certain data infrastructure. And then we do have all the IoT Edge Cloud Continuum and the devices and HPC. So yeah, and well, Gaia X is in the game to well overcome the fragmentation between these layers. And I think with BDVA, FireWare IDSA, and Gaia X joining, we have already covered at least this pivot in the very middle to link data spaces with a cloud or data infrastructure. Well, BDVA goes a little bit more up, and we definitely have to add a bit more southwards. But that is, and I think Hubert Tadieu has mentioned it before, that is where Gaia X is already teaming up with the IPCEI, CIS, and with the European Alliance for Cloud and Data. So well, I would say that is on track. And with all of that in common, there's a lot of energy to really make this holistic ecosystem happen.
Thanks a lot. Maybe if there are some last comments from Koen and Ovidio, and then I hear we should move also to the closing session. So maybe last comments on this question, Koen or Ovidio start, and then Koen, yeah.
Koen, do you have?
Well, HighPeak is horizontal, so and we noticed that in different communities they have similar challenges. So we try to bring them together, especially in a road mapping activity that's not too difficult to do. Yeah. We are not really involved in the verticals.
So from our point of view, I think what we see as a need is more alignment between the strategic research agenda. We see more and more, or in the last period, the kind of development in the direction of shopping list, a lot of topics and the copy and paste from one partnership to another. So maybe a kind of cleanup of this strategic research agenda to have clear uniqueness for the different partnerships will help. Then what will help as well to increase the cooperation between the partnerships will be probably synchronized calls between the different partnerships that will address the ecosystem, but at the same time will put in perspective the applications and the convergence of technologies. Then from our point of view, we are seeing more and more an interest for horizontal platforms and horizontal application because of this convergence of technologies. And we see that sometimes the vertical focus brings the creation of silos and isolation. And the last point is the important element to prioritize and synchronize between what is in the work program of the European Commission and what is in the work program of the different partnerships in order to complement each other and maybe address technologies and application at the different TRL levels much better.
Thanks a lot, Ovidio. I think this last question raised a lot of food for thoughts on what our challenge is also for the next months to indeed try to really bring again all these, I think, initiatives together and do a strategic road mapping, create the synergies between the different funding programs, push the deployment, and of course deepen, I think, the vertical use cases of these different technologies. Rolf, over to you. I think we have to move slowly to the closing session.
Yeah, particular thanks to the panelists. Great job. Thank you for your engagement, your contributions, and it was really a pleasure working with you.